I am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, the complicated mother-daughter relationship. The mother-daughter relationship fascinates me, perhaps because I am a motherless mother. I lost my mother when I was 13 years old. Today, having a 13-year-old daughter makes me wonder what my relationship might have been if my mom didn't get killed in the severe earthquake in Armenia. When my guest's book, The Girl in the Red Boots, Making Peace with My Mother, landed on my desk, I have to be honest, I was hesitant to read it, let alone to have a conversation with the author on the podcast. Having read many books on the subject, I know it can get too emotional for me. Often the books I have read talked about the emotionally unavailable, abusive, toxic, narcissistic mothers. The mother-daughter relationship is one of the most important and complicated in the lives of most adult women. Show me a daughter who hasn't felt wounded temporarily or permanently by her mother, and I will be surprised, writes today's guest. Grudges, glitches, misunderstandings, and unhealed wounds often linger, creating distress and disconnections. Making peace requires a few essential ingredients: curiosity, perseverance, and hope. End of quote. Judith Rabinor, PhD, is a clinician, author, writing coach, speaker, and workshop leader. In addition to her New York City private psychotherapy practice, she offers remote consultations for families, therapists, and writers. Judy has published dozens of articles for both the public and professionals and has authored 2 previous books: A Starving Madness, Tales of Hunger, Hope, and Healing, published in 2002, and Befriending Your Ex After Divorce, Making Life Better for You, Your Ex, and Yes, Your Ex, published in 2012. A sought-after speaker and workshop leader, Judy speaks at national and international mental health conferences and runs workshops at colleges, universities, spas, and retreat centers. Over the past 40 years, Judy has specialized in mother-daughter relationships. She writes, "Helping my patients understand their mothers has helped me become familiar with parts of myself and my mother I might have never known if not for the stories I've heard. We don't choose our mothers, but as an adult, you always have an opportunity to choose new pathways. It's never too late to let go of frustrated expectations and celebrate the connection you might have thought was doomed to disappointment and hurt. Your mother is the most important woman you've ever known." When it comes to our mothers, people have mixed feelings. In fact, ambivalence is part of all healthy and close relationships. And for that, relationships do deserve to be saved. This book gave me optimism about the possibility of transformation and change through reflection and healing and owning our story. Dr. Rabinor is an extraordinarily gifted storyteller and writer. Her memoir is phenomenal. I don't know about you, but I personally love memoirs. And this one reads like you are watching a movie. It's heartfelt, gripping, and tantalizing. I couldn't put it down. I can't recommend it enough for yourself or as a gift. Before we get to today's show, I would love to suggest some books that I have found helpful on the subject. Motherless Daughters, The Legacy of Loss by Hope Edelman is a phenomenal book that I can truly say that changed my life. It is a must-read for all daughters who have lost their mothers early in their lives. And her second book is equally fantastic, Motherless Mothers, How Mother Loss Shapes the Parents We Become. Another great book is The Emotionally Absent Mother, How to Recognize and Heal the Invisible Effects of Childhood Emotional Neglect. The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller is a must-read if you are in the space of trauma, personal development, or parenting. And the last one is Mothers Who Can't Love by Susan Forward. I also want to leave you with a quote by Carl Jung. Every mother contains her daughter in herself, and every daughter her mother, and every mother extends backwards into her mother and forwards into her daughter. Please enjoy this fantastic conversation with Judith Rabenor. I am so delighted, so deeply honored to have this opportunity to speak with you today and to ask you the questions that I am dying to ask. Your book is just phenomenal. I love memoirs in general, but this book is so masterfully written. Masterful is the word. And I don't say that lightly. I read a lot. In general, I read for the podcast, just also, for my own interest. It was like watching a movie. Your details are so rich and you describe things in three-dimensional way. And I was in it with you. I couldn't put it down. I was cooking dinner. The book is with me. I was so engrossed in this book, in your story, so captivated. The way you talk about your therapy clients, your life. And I learned so much as a therapist from you. This is such a rich book. I am blown away. And the title, The Girl in the Red Boots, I cried many times. I reflected and I followed your journey. So thank you so much for writing this book. It's a gift. And thank you for being here today.
Oh, Anna, thank you for having me. I see your enthusiasm and it touches me deeply because this book was a lifelong journey for me in writing. And to touch you makes me feel it was worth it. There were many, many times that I said, I can't put this story together. I knew all the pieces of the story, but to put them together as a book was really a challenge. And thank you. I appreciate your enthusiasm, which I feel is really genuine.
Yeah. Because I took a writing class during the pandemic. I decided to do something different, something challenging, something new. I took a writing class, personal essay writing class, and it was very hard to write something about your life from your memories. And here you are writing about your childhood in such richness and detail. So how could you do that? Have you written stories and the essays and kept them? How long did it take you to write this book?
That's the exact right question. Because I started writing this book after my mother died, but I have been going to writing classes, and my mother died 9 years ago. But I have been going to writing classes and writing things since I am in college. And recently I found one of the stories in the book. It's called Burlington. And it's really, to me, was the hardest story to write. It was the story of the death of my fiance. And I have a letter from a writing teacher who was my old college writing teacher, dated 1967. Is that amazing?
That is amazing.
And the fact that I saved it, that I saved that letter moving from place to place as we do over the decades of our life, right? But I saved that letter because I was so, writing that story was so important to me. And many of the other stories, The Girl in the Red Boots, that's a story I started writing in 1983. Ask me the question how I remember it's 1983.
How do you remember it? Yes.
I remember it because 1983 was the year that my mother-in-law came over to my house and told me she was getting married. And I told her that her son, my husband, who was her son and I were getting divorced. So here's my mother-in-law getting married, and here am I getting divorced. I'm 40 years old. And my mother-in-law, who had complained for the last 12 years, told me that divorce wasn't really so awful. And she started telling me all these funny stories of things that happened to her. And I said to myself, I can't believe that she's now telling these funny stories. I had like memories of her sitting on my couch weeping. But anyway, I went back and took a writing class. You know, just like during the pandemic, you took a writing class. Well, I took a writing class when I was getting divorced, thinking I need something new. And I started writing my mother-in-law's stories. Well, that lasted 3 sessions, and then I moved to my mother. And I wrote the 2 stories that are in the first chapter of this book. One of them is The Girl in the Red Boots, and one of them is the tonsil story. Those stories like poured out of me. But in answer to how did I get all these details, I've taken those stories with me to writing classes where teachers have said to me, tell me more, tell me more. When you were sitting in the back seat of the car, what were you wearing? And I would say, I'm not sure. And she'd say, make it up. If you're not sure, just do anything to push yourself to the next sentence, the next 3 words. And now I teach writing classes, and that's what I say to people. If you can't remember it, just think back. What would you have been wearing in the 1950s? And all of a sudden, something would come to my mind about a dress that I got when I was in 8th grade, and it was my favorite dress.
I know. I love the title. Of course, it captures one of the main stories, right? Who you were, or your mom, the original girl in the red boots. That part was so tearful for me. And I also love how you juxtapose, you know, your clients, your patients' stories, and something insightful shows up for you, some traumatic or some healing. I love also how the book is this progression of someone's life. It has the beginning and it ends with your mom's life. But the Burlington story, you kept it for the end. It was towards the end. I was looking for it in the book because you mentioned about your first fiance, right? Your in the beginning parts of the book.
Right.
And I was curious, is she going to write about this? And there it was towards the end. I think it was special. And just to see your own healing through this book, I could see the progression, the growth as you put the stories together. It's a fascinating way of writing masterfully, and the whole story comes together. I also love the little exercises that you have before each chapter. And I want to ask you maybe to share one of those, because it took me to places I didn't know. First, I wanted to skip that part. I'm like, oh, I'm going to skip this part, right? But no, when I started reading, I started doing the activity, and it was very powerful. So how do you come up with those prompts?
I don't know. This is just how my mind works. I have been doing one of those exercises, the one that opens and closes the book. I started doing in the 90s. And where it came from, I can't really tell you. Should I do that now? Because
please, yes,
my favorite one. Well, I've done lots of writing workshops, and right now I'm writing up a proposal, and that is going to be one of the core exercises in the workshop. And I ask everybody, and I can ask everybody now, but if you're in the car, please don't shut your eyes. But I ask everybody to imagine that they're looking through some old photographs. And they may be looking in a shoebox, because that's how I have kept old photographs. Now, of course, we keep them on the camera. But anyway, this is from another era. Imagine you're looking through some photographs, searching for a picture of your mother that has something to tell you about her life. You may find a picture from yesterday, from 5 years ago, or you may go all the way back to the beginning. Find a picture that tells you something about your mother, and notice the expression on her face. What is she thinking about? What do you learn about your mother from looking at this picture? Imagine now you're putting a frame around the picture. What type of a frame are you going to put? Will it be a simple steel frame or an elaborate frame? What does the frame tell you about how you feel about your mother? How you feel about her now? How you felt about her then? And where are you going to put this picture? On your dresser? On your desk? On a wall? See yourself looking at this picture and just notice the feelings get stirred up in you when you look at your mother at this very special time.
I think it's very powerful. I was hesitant to interview you and read this book because when I read the subtitle, Making Peace with My Mother, for someone who doesn't have a mother, I was hesitant to interview you because I knew a lot of emotions may show up for me. As you can tell, when you told that prompt, I immediately saw a picture of my mom when she was graduating from college, right before she got married. You know, I have that picture, but of course I haven't framed it. My listeners know, I lost my mom when I was 13. She was killed in a severe earthquake. And, I don't have wounds to heal as many people who have relationships with their moms who lived, right? Or who are living. A lot of people have complicated, complex, ambivalent relationships with their mothers. It's a whole spectrum. They are the narcissistic mothers. They are the judgmental, critical, never accepting mothers, the emotionally unavailable mothers. There are all those books written about the bad mother. And what I loved about this book, even though you talked about your mom in the beginning, portraying in a quote unquote bad light, it ends up in a very different way. And that positive message that you impart, that relationships are complex, is what touched me. You made peace with your mom, even though you didn't get what you wanted. And so I don't know what I want to ask right now, except it brought up a lot of emotions for me.
Well, what I want to say is that, first of all, losing your mother at 13 means you're left with a loss that never can be filled. No one can replace the mother. And I'm crying watching you. My eyes are filling up too, because you're living with what would it have been like to have had a mother. And I can only think of 14-year-old you, 15-year-old you graduating, you every moment of your life not having a mother to witness. And that's one of the things I wrote at the end of the book. I realized that my mother was my anchor. She was my anchor. And even though she did some things that felt selfish or stupid, by the end of the book, I understood that she was a product of her generation and I am a product of my generation. And I wish I could do a workshop with you.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we could do one together after the show, because I think I just wrote something up for a local library that I'm going to do a talk at. And I wrote, even when our mothers are no longer part of our daily lives, we carry them deep within us. From birth to death, all women are defined both positively and negatively by this most important relationship, the mother-daughter bond. And so you were robbed. You were robbed. And that is tragic. And I know you saw that I wrote that my father died when I was 30, but number one, 30 is not 13. And I had my mother until she was 93.
Yeah. And, hearing that, sometimes it makes me jealous to hear those stories. That loss came up for me when I read this book, that I didn't have that. But not in a bad way that I'm jealous, but a lot of stuff showed up for me But it touched me deeply. I mean, you write so beautifully. You said that you also opened the book with that workshop, right? Where you guide women through this exercise and say that your mother welcomed you to womanhood. Your mother is the most important woman you will ever know.
I know. Isn't that, it makes me cry.
It's so true. Even if I didn't have my mom, I know the impact that she had, or the lack of her presence, also impacted who I was, who I am, and the woman I became. I mean, it's so profound. Whether you live with the mom or you don't, I think that's the most important woman in our life.
And, I do another exercise where I know this brings up sad memories, or sad feelings, because we just remember both the richness and the loss at the same time. But I say, imagine you're sitting on your mother's bed and your mother is putting on her makeup. Watch your mother as she looks in the mirror. Notice what she's wearing. How does she look at herself as she combs her hair? Does she comb your hair, or does she use a brush? Notice what it feels like to remember your mother brushing your hair. And whenever I ask a question like that, it just brings up so many memories for people, either remembering that their mother brushed their hair, or that they can't remember their mother brushing their hair because it didn't happen. Because I met with someone yesterday who was one of 11 children. One of 11 children. And she was the second oldest. Let's imagine whether her mother brushed her hair or not. If her mother had 9 other babies coming out in the next 10 years, I don't know. She didn't get a lot of private time with her mother, right? I know our mothers are the most important women we will ever know. And the way they loved us, we've imbibed that. We've imbibed their imprint, whether we are conscious or unconscious of it. And I see you nodding, and
yeah.
It feels even more profound as we get older, and we realize that you only get one chance at certain things. In the Jewish religion, when a parent dies, there's a year of mourning. When a spouse dies, there's a month of mourning.
Wow.
And that's because a spouse can be replaced, and a parent cannot be replaced. A parent cannot be replaced. The parenting we got and didn't get has shaped us.
True.
For better and worse. I know.
And I think making peace with it is what's important for our own healing.
And I think I write one sentence at the end of the book that I love. It says, I have not forgotten the things my mother did that hurt me, but I have rebalanced my vision of her. I have understood that all parents do hurtful things. All parents do thoughtful things. I myself, as a parent, have done many things that I had no idea what the ramifications would be. And I write about how I got divorced when I was 40, and my daughter was 8 and my son was 12. And it was in 1983. That was the height of the divorce movement. And I had no idea that for every Thanksgiving after that, my children would think, I'm with Dad, I wonder how Mom is. I'm with Mom, I wonder how Dad is. And my children would feel torn, as I hear in my office every day, I have to spend Christmas Eve with my father, Christmas Day with my mother. I have to pack my clothes. I wasn't thinking about my children. I was thinking about myself when I made that decision. I think I thought I was thinking about my children, and I thought children are better off with 2 happy parents than unhappily married parents. But I didn't understand what was in store for me, getting divorced and being alone and having relationships and this, that, and the other thing, right? So the good thing is we've learned from that our brains are plastic. We've learned from neuroplasticity that we can have a story we tell. Like, my divorce was a good thing. And then we can eventually analyze that and think, well, it might have been good for me, but it did have its negative ramifications for my children. I can't deny that. I can't deny that.
Yeah. And making peace, I think, with daughters making peace with their mothers. And sometimes, there is neglect, abuse, which you didn't experience, right? You are very clear about that.
Right.
But often I meet women who say, my mother did this or didn't do this, and they are stuck and they can't forgive, they can't move on. And I'm not judging those people, how can I? But it's not about justifying or their actions or changing the story to feel good. I think it's about personal healing, whether these people choose to continue having relationships with their mothers because of the past or not. But I think forgiveness is big, and grieving the loss of what they could have given but they haven't received, or I think this big part of healing. And making that peace is for yourself is important. And it doesn't mean go and have a relationship with your mother who abused you or neglected you. That could be possible, right? In some cases, people do make peace and restore a whole new adult relationship.
Yes.
And in some cases, they cut their parents off completely. I think it's okay. Those choices are all right as long as the person heals. That's what's important for me, and makes peace with that part of their life.
I agree with you. I mean, another thing that we have to really understand is that all these toxic stories that we tell and retell and retell, they damage us. They don't damage the person. So if somebody is telling a story over and over again about their mother or their father or their ex-husband, he did this, she did that, he did this, she did that. The person who is creating negative energy inside of them is the teller of this story. And also, people are not black and white. I always say to my patients, no one is as bad as the worst thing that they ever did. Like, think of the worst thing you ever did. Like I've done, almost anybody who's married has said some very not nice things, very unkind things to their spouse at a moment that they just feel frustrated. Like, what am I doing with this person? Right? Husband number 1, 2, 3, or 14 can really get on your nerves. And we get angry. We get angry. And as much as I personally work on being kind, I know that when I'm kind, I benefit. If I help an old person crossing the street, I feel good. I feel those good chemicals surging inside of me when I do something nice to somebody. And I feel awful. The worst thing about saying something nasty to somebody that you love is the next day you regret it. And you have to live with the regret you feel from doing something that was unkind. So anyway, yes, when we hang on to these old stories, it damages us. And usually that old story is not the only story. Like if I ask people, so can you remember one good thing your mother did for you? And almost everybody will have to say yes. There is hardly a person alive who didn't have a parent who did one good thing. And what happens when you think about that one good thing? Do you know the work of Rick Hansen, Hansen?
I do. I admire him, and he has been a past guest on the podcast. Yes.
I admire him too.
Yeah.
And the idea of taking a good moment and expanding it and exploring it and embellishing it and holding it close and noticing what it brings up for you. It brings up very good feelings. And I write that in the book, that one day there was a young woman in my office and she was very angry at her parents. And she was maybe 23 and they lived in Denver or somewhere. And her boyfriend broke up with her. And she thanked me for being very empathic. And I said, so close your eyes and think about it, somebody else who's ever been helpful to you. And to her surprise, she thought about her mother. And she remembered when some teacher bawled her out or did something unfair, that her mother came into her room when she was crying and her mother stroked her hair. And I said, see your mother stroking your hair. What does that feel like? Imagine her stroking your arm now. And this girl burst into tears and she said, I miss my mother. And she had never said those words. And that wasn't even my intention. But I know that buried inside all of us are many, many different stories. And sometimes we hold on to the bad story to our own detriment, right? That's what you and I are both saying. to our own detriment.
And we rehearse it, we tell it, we retell it. It becomes a very well edited version of the original story, I think. And we start to believe in that story. We cling to that story, and it sort of becomes this defining story. What I love about those exercises and the way you do your therapy, you don't ask them, so tell me about your mother, tell me about your childhood, because you're going to get that canned, edited answer. And that's not what you want. You surprise them by evoking memories and putting them in the story. And I think that's very masterful as a therapist and as a writer. And it immediately, so much changes in a person. They divorce from the story, the original story.
Well, these canned stories that we all tell, I mean, we tell them for a reason. We're trying to figure something out. And that's what we want to help people with. What are you trying to figure out by telling the same story about how your mother did this or your mother did that? And to get people to say, I long to be cared for, is much harder than to get people to say, she did this and she did that. And once we can get someone to acknowledge what I really needed was to be cared for, and then they're faced with the ultimate human challenge. How do we care for ourselves, right? If you didn't get what you needed when you were 5 or 8 or 10, you can't go back and get that, but you can get something now, whether you're 42 or 82. You can get something now and you can give it to yourself. Or you might have to make a new friend or create a new relationship or ask somebody in your current world, can we start over? Can we do this? Can we share a moment together? People are always asking me, how do I heal all these bad relationships? And you and I, we're in the talk therapy business where we talk everything out. But sometimes the most important thing is to take a walk with somebody. Let's take a walk together. And sometimes just holding hands. Yesterday, I was on the street with my daughter-in-law, and she just reached out and held my hand, and it felt so cozy. It was beyond words. Exactly. And sometimes I'll ask people, imagine 3 people are sitting in your living room with you, and they believe in you. Notice the look in their eye when they believe in you. What are you feeling right now? Without them telling me the story, what are you feeling? The feeling that somebody believes in me really matters, right? And we all need to try to find people in our lives who believe in us, who support us, who love us, regardless of what our childhoods were, however imperfect they were. And that's another thing that in writing this book, I got to really face that my mother was imperfect and I am imperfect. And love is imperfect. Love is imperfect.
Yeah. I love the tonsillectomy story. I'm wondering if you could tell that just a little bit, and your mom's attitude,
Oh my gosh.
What you craved in those early, and it sounds like you were very different, and you make peace with that too, that you are different and your mom was different. Her outlook, she was positive, Pollyanna, you're fine, just fine. And you were this deep feeler, thinker, and you wanted attunement, emotional resonance, but you weren't getting it. So that story captures that so well.
Well, it is really, thank you for bringing this up. It's the story of my transformation, is that for years I carried this story. And the story was, my mother told me we were going to my cousin Winnie's birthday party. And she picked me up at school that day, and I was all excited. I got all dressed up in a new outfit. We get in the car, and instead of going to my cousin Winnie's birthday party, we go to the hospital, and I have a tonsillectomy. And I was completely unprepared. And I remember I still have a vision, whether it's a real vision or it's something just from telling the story so many times, of me being yanked away from her and put on a stretcher. And I still remember the ether. And I remember the smell of that ether when they knock you out so they can give you a tonsillectomy. And when I got older and I went to therapy, the therapist said to me, "She what?" The therapist couldn't believe that my mother did this. And I said to my mother, "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" And she said, "I was just following doctor's orders. The doctor told me not to tell you, that it would scare you to think you were having a surgery. So instead, I told you were going to a birthday party." Well, I felt like punching her for years. The doctor told you and you did this stupid thing. Why would you do that? It just made me so angry at my mother. And I saw her as this passive woman who just followed my father, did what he said, followed the doctor, followed her mother. Didn't she have a mind of her own? Didn't she think through that this would be damaging to me? But by the end of the book, I recognize that when my father was dying, the doctor told us, "Don't tell your father he's dying. Tell him he's getting better." Because if you tell someone they're dying, they give up. That was the theory in the 70s. Don't tell him he's dying. And suddenly, when I got to be much older, I was already in my 50s, I remember we didn't tell my father he was dying. So my father had no opportunity to say goodbye to anybody. And instead, we all lived a lie. And there's a chapter in the book where I write, I remembered we were having a birthday dinner for him, which we all knew would be the last birthday. And he's sitting there with an oxygen tank, so skinny, having trouble breathing. And he starts screaming and he says, "Why is everybody telling me I'm getting better? How can I be getting better? Your mother is feeding me potatoes at every meal and cake, and I'm not getting better." And I just hold his hand and I don't tell him the truth. What did I do? I followed doctor's orders. Now, as an adult, I realized maybe I followed doctor's orders because it was easier for me. It's hard to tell somebody who's 53 years old that they're dying. And that was the truth. It was too hard for me to tell him. So I followed doctor's orders. And maybe it was too hard for my mother. She didn't know how to tell me that I was having a surgery, or she just didn't know what to do. But suddenly recognizing that I had done this other gross thing made me understand that I did indeed love my father and I did something that wasn't so right. So we all do imperfect things in our lives, many of them, right?
Yeah, there is another story in the book where you meet your friend and you want to go for a walk on the beach, your friend, and your mom says, "Just go, leave your daughter."
Right.
Tell that story too. That's fascinating.
Oh,
I
I
love
hate that. I hate that story. So
it comes full circle.
it comes full circle. So I felt my mother was so emotional. I felt she was a deceptive person. For more reasons, you'll have to read the whole book in order to understand some of the big deceptions. We didn't even get to the big deception yet.
I loved that. It was like, wow, this is just getting better.
We didn't even get to the biggest deceptions in her advice. But from the tonsils thing, I understood. And
you were, to clarify, you were 8 or 9 years old, right?
Yeah, I was 8 with the tonsils.
Yes. Yeah.
So now the book skips around in time, but the themes get developed, right?
That's what I loved about it. Yes.
So suddenly we flash to like 38. And my friend has just gotten divorced, and I'm sitting on the beach with my mother and my daughter is like 3 and she's digging in the sand. And I want to hear how my friend's divorce is going because my marriage is not going all that well anyway. And I say to my mother, "Would you watch Rachel? I want to take a walk with Barbara." And my mother says, "Sure." And my mother says, "Don't tell her you're leaving." And I think my mother knows. The name of this chapter is Mother Knows Best. So I think my mother must know that the best thing to do is not tell my daughter. And my friend and I just get up and walk away. And my mother is watching my daughter. But then I turn around and I look at her. And I see my daughter screaming. And my mother is holding her down on her lap. And I turn and I run back. And my mother and my daughter runs into my arms. And she said, Mommy, why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" And I calm her down and I hug her. And then I say to my mother, "Mom, why'd you tell me to leave her?" She said, "That's what I used to do when you were little. I would just..." But then I think, why did I follow my mother's instructions? Now I'm studying to be a psychologist. don't I know that attachment and being authentic and being reliable and being trustworthy are the hallmarks of good parenting? Don't I know that? And instead I'm sneaking off. And I realize that I have imitated my mother. I have taken her to be my guru, even though she did this deceptive thing to me with the tonsil story. And so that's why I can still do workshops that say, just like I just wrote this line, all women are defined positively and negatively by their mothers. This primary relationship impacts our lives consciously and unconsciously. We find ourselves repeating what our mothers did in so many ways. It's really incredible, right?
I can't agree more. It's so incredible. Where do I go from here? And this book is so juicy in many ways. But I want to know, what was it that you were yearning all your life when you were little? Now that you can think of yourself as a little kid in the kitchen, or, if I were to ask a similar prompt, what were you yearning? What did you want from her?
I feel like if there was what was missing, my mother was, I call her an uber Pollyanna person. So no matter what I told her, my friends are picking on me. I have no friends. Now we know that being shunned in 5th grade is actually, it's traumatic. It's not my mother's fault. But now we consider this something that really has to be dealt with by the school, by parents. And my mother would say, don't worry if your friend doesn't like you. Wait till a boy drops you. That's really what's going to hurt. And so I wanted an attuned mother. I wanted somebody who tuned into my hurt feelings. Like I remember when I just told one story of what I did wrong with my own daughter, but I remember a story of what I did right with my daughter. I remember my daughter once sitting on the couch being so sad. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, no one wants to be my friend. And she must have been 11. And it really brought all this back to me. That's the age when, like, the mean girls run the show, right? The mean girls are constantly kicking somebody out of the crowd. And I remember saying to her, oh, I'm so sorry. This happened to me. I remember what happened. And I said, well, come spend the day with me and Grandma. She said, I don't want to be with you and Grandma. I want to be with my friends. I said, I know. Well, we're second best. We love you. We're here for you. And I didn't say to her, this is going to pass, because I know it's going to pass, but it doesn't make you feel good when, you're in pain. And I wanted an attuned mother. But I understood that she grew up in a different culture. She grew up in the aftermath of World War I, where women just accepted their roles. Like, I want to give you something that I didn't put in the book. So one of the lines in the book that I love is, my mother was born in 1918, 1 year before women got the right to vote. And although I never thought about it when I was young, this fact shaped her life. Women just accepted things. So I've told this when I've been discussing the book, that when I was married the first time, I was a teacher and my husband was in law school, and I got my first credit card and it was the name Mrs. Arnold Rabinor. That was the name on my credit card. Women could not get credit cards in their own name. Isn't this crazy?
Wow.
I'm the one making the money. He's in school and this credit card is in his name. What it means to be a woman who has really no access, no awareness often. My mother really didn't understand the financial circumstances of her life. She used to say, I'm very independent. I pay the bills. But she didn't understand how the money came in. She just wrote the check and signed her name. That is not what we call now being financially responsible, right? That's not having no clue as to how her life really worked financially.
And it sounded like all throughout your life, and it comes in the book, you wanted to understand what happened to your mom. Why was she like this? And you were probing at certain points, especially there is a scene at a cafe after your television. You were an expert on TV on this talk show, and you're at this cafe afterwards with your mom, and your mom came with you. She was in the audience. She teared up. you are having a conversation and you're like, Mom, you helped this mother-daughter duos on stage, they to deepen their connection. With eating disorder, they had problems. I don't want to give out the whole story, but what's interesting, your mom teared up and she became very emotional watching you perform on stage and help other mother-daughters. And in the cafe, I love that scene. Talk to me about that. You were like probing her and she was like dismissing or deflecting your questions about her tears and
My mother was not reflective. And I said, so my mother cried and I said to her, Mom, she cried watching me because it was a beautiful moment where I helped a mother and daughter on a big television program. And I said, Mom, do you know, I've never seen you cry. I don't remember you crying when Grandma died, when Daddy died, when your second husband died, when your third husband died. And she said, that's me. I don't cry. I said, well, what do you do? She said, January is the saddest month for me. That's when your dad died and her other two husbands, they all died in January. She said, you know what I do? I get theater tickets. So what she was saying to me essentially was, I push away my sadness and I get busy and I do something to make me feel good. And she said, is there anything wrong with that? And I had to say, no, there's nothing wrong with that. But I had to just accept that we were different, that I became a therapist because I wanted to tell people, if you're crying, there's good reason you're crying, and tears are a gift. Then allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to cry and feel your pain. Life has pain. Life is just not one joyful party. And as a matter of fact, there's a beautiful saying that I used in another book I wrote, and it says this: joy shared, twice the gain; sorrow shared, half the pain. I just love that so much. I thought it had Jewish origin, but now I looked it up on the internet. It says it's Scandinavian. But what it really says to me is when, Anna, in the beginning of this interview, when you started crying, I started crying. And I think that people really yearn to feel connected, that their tears will evoke sadness in another. And so when I would have a big loss in my life, such as when I lost my fiance, even though my mother did some wonderfully heroic things, nonetheless, she also would say, let's go shopping. So shopping was a fix for everything. But you know what? Now I notice sometimes I do the same thing. If I'm feeling really gloomy, well, not during the pandemic, if I went out to a store and bought myself something, I would feel like, that's good. I'm doing something for myself. But it's just my mother was missing that other chip. And many things got edited out of this book. Do I have time to tell just one more story?
Yes. And you were trying to understand the puzzle of her parents, because she always said, I had a perfect childhood. I had perfect parents, right?
Right. And I knew that it took me my whole life to understand that actually that harmed me, because then I was angry that she wasn't perfect. If she had perfect parents, why didn't I have perfect parents? And I would say things to her like, Mom, you were a teenager. Didn't you ever come home late? Didn't you ever cut school? Weren't you ever fresh to your parents? She'd say, I don't remember. I don't remember bad things. But I'll tell you one thing that I learned in a writing class. So my mother got married at 18 because she was pregnant. And I tell this in the book too, right in the beginning of the book. And she found out she was pregnant when she was at sleepaway camp up in Maine. And in some class I was in, I took that shred of information and the teacher said, write about it. And I had to make up a scene that my mother is 18 years old. She wakes up in Maine. She's throwing up for the third day in a row. She's in the bathroom in the camp bunk. Now, if anybody here has ever gone to camp, these bunks are pretty dilapidated. And to be up early in the morning in Maine where it's freezing, throwing up in a toilet because you're pregnant. And then, I don't know how she found out she was pregnant, how she realized. Then she had to call my father. She had to call her parents. Her parents had to come pick her up. there was a big meeting of the families, and the parents told the children, you guys get married. No college for you, no Dartmouth for you, father. No, I just blanked on the name of the school my mother was supposed to go to. Doesn't matter. No college for you guys. You're getting married. The story I had been told growing up, it was a fairy tale story that my parents eloped because they were so in love. And it wasn't until I got so much older, till I was in college myself, that they told me the truth, that they got married because my mother was pregnant. They didn't go to college. My father had to go into the family business. They moved down to Maryland where they knew no one. And 3 months later, my mother had a miscarriage. My mother must have been beyond sad. Her whole future was changed. And her parents had a big role in the decisions that were made. And both of their parents. And no one said to them, well, good, you're not pregnant. Maybe you should go back to college now. Maybe you should go to college at night. No one ever encouraged that. I know it was a different time, but she never said one bad word about her parents about this. So I understood that she just had to hold on to this story that we were different. I didn't understand what created that, but I understood we were different. That I had a propensity to go into dark places. And actually, it made me understand why I became a therapist, that I became a therapist because I didn't want people to feel like they had to be Pollyanna, hold their head and their chin up high, no matter what happened to them, and that it was okay to grieve what you lost.
Yeah.
The grieving is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, most of our life is going through different kinds of losses, loss upon loss, right? And change entails usually loss of some sort. When you are a mother, when you become pregnant, that's a loss of your youth, loss of your status. You will no longer be unpregnant. It's a happy, joyous moment. You're pregnant, but you're losing your previous stage of life, your previous self. Now you're a mother. Now you're pregnant. Now you deliver. Oftentimes that's another loss. You're not pregnant anymore. You have a child. It's a new reality. It hits you. And then you are a mother of 3 all of a sudden, and you have to grieve that once you were not even a mother. Now you had a firstborn. That was a different stage. I think we overlook and we just plow through life without pausing, reflecting. We have such an aversive thing towards loss. And many of my friends tell me that I'm morbid. I love this stuff. I do love this stuff because when I was thrown into this grief and loss at age 13, I didn't know how to cope. My mom was still baiting me and I was very dependent, but I learned to cope and be with the feelings and not be scared of them, that this is part of life. It gave me this perspective that, wow, everybody's shoving their emotions, pushing them away, numbing them, but actually you need to feel them. They're going to make you stronger. There's nothing wrong with that. I learned that lesson a hard way, but I think it served me. I'm okay with loss and grief. I actually allow myself to be with that. I'm not saying I'm enjoying that process, but I'm okay with that as part of life. And I lost my father in March of this year. That's why I took the writing class to sort of process my newest loss. But this time was different.
Right.
This time I'm not able to move through the same way. And I have all sorts of different kinds of feelings this time. I am afraid.
How old was your father?
73.
Wow.
And now I'm afraid to even open up a video that he talks about death. Someone sent me right before his death. He talks about dying and death. And I have that video and I don't want to look at it because it's hard. As much as I am all for feeling and accepting loss, sometimes the enormity is so big that you compartmentalize and you don't want to feel it, you put it aside for another day. That's also part of the grieving process, I think. I mean, there's no right or wrong, right?
There's no right or wrong. And that we're all wired differently. I had to really accept that about me and my mother, that we're all wired differently. And I too, I'm like you. I'm running a therapy group, and a man in the group just this week told something so sad about his daughter who has a terminal disease, and she's in her 30s. And this man is telling this story, and my eyes fill up. And I say to him, all we can do is sit with you in your grief. I mean, you can't fix it. You can't change it. You can't make it go away. Grief is part of life. And I guess there are people who, like when my mother said, I buy theater tickets, I had to accept that. I had to accept that I am me, and that I have this sensitivity, and I feel it's a gift, and I love talking to you. I could talk to you for the next 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a client recently, sometimes unexpected things happen in therapy. And one of the things I admired about you is that you experiment and you out of the box creative things in your therapy. Also, like with a woman, I think Jenny, her name was, right? You start with this woman who has eating disorder. You bring an apple and you eat with her in your office.
Right.
I mean, how amazing is that? Then you go to a bagel shop with her.
Right.
And so I love those stories. And I had a client recently, a couple, and the first thing they tell me when I say, why are you here? They said, our 5-year-old son died. And it brought up so much for me. And they were telling the story and crying, and I was crying with them. And it brought us together closer, and it made our work, I think, more special and meaningful. I didn't cry throughout the entire 10 sessions afterwards, but it showed that I'm human. I have feelings. I'm not going to sit with a mask and hear they tell me this gut-wrenching story. And the first session just went like that. I just cried with them, and they shared their story.
To me, that's completely beautiful. And I agree. I mean, I'm much older than you, so I was trained before you. We were trained to be neutral, blank screen. It's crazy. Somebody tells you their 5-year-old died. How tragic, right?
Right.
I mean, life is just filled, as you said, life is filled with so many losses. I hope you have me on this show again.
I would. I love talking to you. And you're in New York, right?
Yeah, where are you?
I'm in New Jersey. So we can even meet in person.
I know. Perfect. Where are you in New Jersey?
I'm in Princeton.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'm on the Upper West Side. So,
yeah. I was in New York last weekend.
I was in New Jersey yesterday.
Oh, boy. I love that. But how did your mother's mothering inform your own parenting, like those conscious and unconscious patterns?
Well, it informed it in lots of ways. And as I said, unfortunately, I imitated some of the things she did wrong. And then I bent over backwards to be different. So my own children, they would, when they would come home from school and say, oh, something happened, I got picked on, this is unfair. And I would tell me what happened. Should I call the teacher? Can I help you with your home? I'm so upset that you're upset. I see there are tears in your eyes. And my children say, Mom, save that for your patients. I'm okay. I'm perfectly okay. Right. So I think that I became the opposite of her in that way, for sure. But I also showed in the book that I admired her, that I realized that she was the girl and she was the original girl in the red boots.
I love that part. Yeah.
She stood up for herself, and she stood up for me in lots of ways that I didn't really expect, that I hadn't really honored. That's really the word, that I was too bothered by the negative that I couldn't even appreciate the positive.
Did she know that you were writing this book? Or the stories, not the book. I mean, you started the book when she died.
I read her some of these stories. Some of these stories when she was ill, because she had Parkinson's for the last 10 years of her life. And I would read her a bad story, and she would say, I don't remember that. So that was even further proof that I would say, don't you remember this? I told you such and such, and you said, oh, forget it. And she said, I said that? I don't remember that, but it sounds like me. That was her attitude. That helped her and her generation get by.
Wow. Wow.
I have to
She,
get
she
off in a couple of minutes.
yes, she was quite an amazing woman. And as you say, the original girl in the red boots.
Girl in the red boots.
Yes, yes. And that brought tears to my eyes. That's in the end of this book. And it's just fascinating. I want people to read this book, people who have complicated relationships with their mothers, complex, ambivalent. Therapists, definitely, I highly recommend. And I have a lot of listeners who are coaches, therapists. It's a wonderfully written book, Judith. I so am touched by it and so honored that you were here today to share your presence, your stories, your laughter, your wisdom.
Thank you so much. I also want to tell any listeners that I run a writing class.
I may join that class myself.
I'm going to write to you. I want you to join it. And all the information is on my website, which is my name, JudithReskeRabinor.phd.com. But if you put in the girl in the red boots, Making Peace with My Mother, it'll take anybody to my website too, I hope.
I want to take this class. I think it would be transformational. The way you do your workshops and everything I've heard, it sounds like it would be a shame not to take this opportunity.
Oh, I would love that. And
I didn't even ask you, how did you get on the Oprah show?
You know how I got on the Oprah show? A friend was invited and she was giving a keynote, and she couldn't not do the keynote. It was the exact, and so she recommended me. And they interviewed me on the phone and they took me.
Wow.
Yeah, I was lucky.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much. I would love the opportunity to connect again.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm going to write you. We get off.
A big hug to you. A big hug to you.
Anna. Wonderful. I'm so happy that I had this opportunity to meet with you.
Likewise.
And you crossed that bridge. You were afraid to read the book and, afraid it would bring up too much sadness. And I think it's important to mention that I did not, and you mentioned it already, I didn't have like a grossly abusive mother. And some reviewers have said, these are the kind of issues that most people have. I wasn't locked in a closet.
Yeah.
But carry grudges and traumas, and they really can distort our relationships. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been beautiful.
Likewise. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. I truly loved connecting with Judith. Her book is phenomenal. The Girl in the Red Boots, Making Peace with My Mother. I can't recommend it enough. I hope we can talk about this in our Facebook group furthermore and discuss the complicated, complex mother-daughter relationship. As you've heard, Judith teaches writing classes. I signed up for a 6-week memoir and storytelling class with her, and at the time of this recording, I have already attended the first session, and it was amazing. And FYI, I was the youngest person in the class. If you're on my mailing list, and if I write something worthwhile, I would be happy to share it with you in one of my newsletters. As always, I appreciate a comment, question, feedback from you. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And of course, for you, my international listener, I have a free tool on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. If you enjoy the podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can support your favorite show and get supporter-only benefits and content. And boy, I am creating extra content and some amazing benefits for my patrons. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. And you can connect with me on Instagram, the only social media platform that I use. Authentic Parenting Podcast is my username. Until next week, Connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.